Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. In this session, I'm going to cover the HeadSpin session UIs, our Waterfall and Burst UIs, and give you a sense for how to interpret these UIs, what the data looks like, maybe some functionality that you didn't know exists, and then if we have time, we'll dig into some example sessions beyond sort of the basic ones that I'll walk through. So in terms of the agenda for today, we'll start with reviewing profiling or capture, as we call it. So creating a session, and then look at each of the UIs, the Waterfall UI and the Burst UI. And as I mentioned, dig into some sample sessions if there's time. So let's go ahead and start with session capture. And the way this presentation is going to be structured, I have these checklists, and in these checklists, I'm going to try to cover each of the items on this checklist, and you can hold me accountable for making sure we do so. So what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and start a capture session. I'll just go to my device list. I'll pick out a device here. To start a capture session, we go to the Start Recording Session. We can record with network or without network. I'll go ahead and choose with network. And then once this button turns green, give it a second, I'll go ahead and launch some website, for example. In this case, just launching CNN, just as an example. Here we'll let the web page load. Seems to be taking some time to load this image here, if there is an image. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and stop recording. So at this point, we have access to the Waterfall UI and the Burst UI. And we can jump into those UIs to be able to see what happened during that session. One other thing I'll point out is if I go ahead and start recording again, I can actually go into the performance session list. And what you'll see is once this list loads, and we'll see that this capture button has started recording. Just give this one moment. We'll see that there's a live session here at the very top. This is the session I just started recording on this CNN webpage. If I start interacting with this, then you can see there are network events being captured. I can jump into that session while it's recording. Let's say I'm still interacting with it. And we can see that already we're starting to get some data. So we're getting network data, we're getting log data, and this is being streamed as we're capturing it. So you can see we're starting to get some issue cards, and actually quite a few issue cards across here, the frame rates, and a variety of metrics that are being captured. So just wanted to show you that. I think this is a not very well known feature of the Waterfall UI, but you can see that there's this live session recording indicator. What I'll do here is just go ahead and end capture. Now that the recording is complete, again, we have the same options to jump into that UI, but you'll see here as I navigate back to this UI that the video has loaded, and we have this analysis in progress indicator. This indicates that we are crunching the data, especially the video data that was just uploaded, and doing further analysis to enrich the session data. So, if we go to our downloads here, you can see we have all of the primary data downloads that you would normally see: the screen recording, network traffic, the binary network traffic, the device log, and you can see that as this analysis is running, we'll see data being populated. So that's sort of a quick intro to capturing sessions and working with sessions in a live context. What we'll do now is I'll go ahead and go back to my presentation. We'll jump into the Waterfall UI. And this session is available on the, or this slide deck is available on the Confluence page, and I also shared it in the chat here. So feel free to follow along, and the example sessions are in the speaker notes down at the bottom. So if we go to the Waterfall UI, we'll start with this title pane. So what I'll do at this point is I'll go ahead and close this out. Here we have our title pane. You can see the option to toggle between the Waterfall UI and the Burst UI. You can think of these as two different views of the session data. You can think of a session as really a living document or a living bag of data, right? So the data can be interacted with. You can add data at any point in time. You can ask questions of the data to be able to enrich the data that you're getting. And that can all happen, really at any point in time, starting after the capture is initialized. Here at the top, we have this HeadSpin session. This is the title of the session, and we also have an option for a description. If you click on this, you can give a custom title, as well as a custom description. You can save this, and you'll see that the description has updated. And if you go to, for example, the session list, you would see a custom title and your custom description. You can also, of course, anything we can do here in the UI, you can also do via the API. So we have an API to be able to set that title and description as well. You can add this session to a user flow. So a user flow is going to be some journey that you repeat multiple times, typically either a manual journey that you're repeating as part of the manual test flow, or an automated journey that you're completing using some specific automation script. You can add it to an existing user flow and set the status. The status options are not set, failed, passed, and excluded. Not set means there's no indication. Failed means that something functionally failed in the test. Maybe you had an assertion that failed or the test didn't complete. Passed, of course, means that the test functionally completed. And excluded typically means that there's some headspin side issue. And it doesn't really speak to the quality of the test. Can everyone please make sure they're muted? Thank you. Okay, so yeah, and then if you go to create a new user flow, you can just enter a user flow name. When you submit this, then you will create that user flow. We have
ऑर्डर भी बहुत है बोले तो एक दो कारीगर को लेके आए डेढ़ पैसा मेरे को कर देंगे
see if I can
लो काम नहीं अटकेगा सब हो जाएगा अच्छे
can everyone please make sure you're muted? One second.
Brian, you can mute everybody, I guess.
दिमाग का बोले क्या ऑर्डर नहीं मेरे से बात नहीं
Okay, everyone should be muted now. I know there's a setting to enable muting for everyone on join, but I can't find that setting, so apologies. Okay, so right, we were so this is the device info panel. This is where the location where that device was captured. You have the device address, which is the unique identifier for any device on HeadSpin. This consists of the device ID as well as the host name. You can see that this was on an LTE connection using the AT&T provider. We already showed that live indicator as well as the analysis in progress indicator. You can see analysis is completed for this session. We have our downloads, which include our primary data as well as the time series. The time series are all downloaded individually as CSV files. And then you can add tags to a session. So a tag applies to the entire session. You can add a key value pair. So for example, we'll have some sample tag here. When you apply this tag, if you go to the session list, for example, you can see that this tag is applied to that session. You can filter sessions that have this tag from the session list. And of course, you can always delete, or you can go in and you can edit these tags. So for example, if I wanted to rename this tag, I can go in, I can edit it, and click this button, and then I've renamed this tag.
क्या बनाऊं? अब जब बनाएंगे ना रोल, अभी तो बना नहीं रही हूँ। जब बनाएंगे तो हम वीडियो बनाएंगे। ये 10-15 मिनट बाद बनाऊंगी, तो मीटिंग खत्म हो जाए।
Unfortunately, my administrator tools are very limited while sharing my screen. Does anyone happen to know where the setting is to mute by default? Okay, so what I've done is I've gone back to the session list. You can see I now have this sample tag rename. This is the session. I have the custom title, and you can see, again, here's my links to the Waterfall UI and Burst UI. Perfect. So that covers this this title pane. What we'll do now is we'll jump into the HTTP network summaries. So in general, what we informally call the pie charts are, we have these breakdowns of network traffic specifically for HTTP traffic. These cover 4 different categories of breakdowns: the session-wide metrics, domain metrics, host metrics, and burst metrics. So session-wide obviously applies to all network traffic. In this session, you can see, for example, what fraction of the total data, right, downloaded in this session was binary content, for example, or image content, or JavaScript, for example. You can see for each domain here, and in this particular web page, there are quite a few different domains. You can see what that breakdown is more specifically. And then for each host, which again is basically a subdomain, you can dive into even more details. And then we have this concept of a burst. A burst is basically a network transaction. Bursts are typically, so for mobile devices, network traffic typically is pretty bursty, meaning that there are, for example, when you open a new page, there are a number of connections that are established, network calls that are made to download the content to load the next page. And as you consume content on the next page, you may or may not load additional content, but it typically tends to be pretty bursty, and that's actually an optimization, and also part of the behavior of navigating through mobile applications. So the reason it would be a performance optimization is that by only activating the radio for short time periods, you can optimize your power consumption and thus reduce battery drain. With these, if your screen is of a certain size, you can click more, so you can expand this. You can see even more breakdowns. And you can always jump into this little question mark here if you want to learn more about each of these categories, the individual metrics that are shown, as well as each of these individual breakdowns. So you can see there's the traffic content, the domain and host traffic, the status codes, connection usage, timings, and so forth. Again, that's in this little orange question mark here. You can jump into that documentation. Okay, so I think that, yeah, that covers the pie charts. Next, we'll jump into the screen recording. So the screen recording is obviously over here on the right-hand side. The screen recording is tied to the session timeline, which is shown here in the center. 0 milliseconds is the beginning of the session recording. And then you can see the end of the session recording over here on the right-hand side. So as you scroll through this timeline, you'll see that the screen recording is updating. If you want to scroll to a specific point and then navigate to the screen recording, you can scroll on this timeline, move your mouse up above the timeline, and then go over to the screen recording. And for example, you can pop out the screen recording. You can resize it to make it larger. You can also press play to watch the screen recording from a specific point in time. So here you can see that the screen recording is playing, and I also have my cursor navigating through the timeline to show where I am in terms of all of the data on the timeline. You can obviously pause, you can jump back to the beginning and play from the beginning. And you can also, if you need to, you can always force the screen recording to rotate so you can watch it from a different perspective. This is mostly useful for mobile applications, and in some cases, you may want to watch the screen recording in a rotated view if, for whatever reason, the content isn't displayed, in the perspective that you'll be looking for. So, I guess the final feature to mention here is that you can pop this back in, and then you have it shown in this details panel on the right-hand side. One quick note regarding the details panel, you can always, if you want to see more detail here in the timeline, you can always hide this panel as a whole by clicking that X, and you can bring it back just by clicking on it. So click the X, it hides that, and clicking on it brings it back. You can, of course, also do that while this video is popped out, for example. So you can see, with more detail and in a larger perspective here for this screen recording. Perfect. Next, we'll jump into the time series. So with the time series, the goal is to show how metrics are evolving throughout your test. And we have a number of different categories of time series. We have at the top our impact time and impact count time series. These are based on our HeadSpin issue cards, and we'll talk about impact time and the concept of HeadSpin issues and impacts in more detail later. In blue, we have all of our video time series. So we have our subjective video quality score, blockiness, blurriness, and a variety of other metrics. You can see frame rate is down here. Screen change is this amount of change happening on the screen. You can see as it's high and very peaky, there's a lot happening in terms of the screen. You can see we have audio content being tracked in green here. And then we have a variety of metrics around the network traffic and the device down here in white. So here we have battery metrics, and all of these metrics here are coming from the Android graphics debugger. So frame render times, Wi-Fi signal strength, and in this case, we have geolocation data as well. So with the time series, just a quick guide to interpreting these. Each time series, you can scroll through the timeline and you can see what the value is at any given time. So for video quality MOS here, it's 4.46. On the left-hand side, you can see the maximum value for this time series. So 4.67 is the maximum for the HeadSpin MOS. 24 seconds is the maximum for the impact time. And the units are, of course, indicated over right next to that maximum value. With the time series, you can, there's this green button that says collapse time series. So you can collapse that time series. And you'll see that you've now hidden the entire time series section. You can click on this and you can select individual time series. So for example, if I want to look at just page content time series, I can do so. Or you can, look at several time series. If you want to go back, you can always hover over this little crosshatch here and see this show all time series. And that will just expand the time series back to full set of time series. You can collapse it back to those that you selected. Great. The last thing I'll mention with regards to time series, and I'll do this actually on another session that I have here, is that in some cases you'll see these little orange highlights that show an impact time. These highlights are associated with issue cards that are associated with these time series. So for example, the page content time series is related to the low page content issue card. When you click on that issue card, you see the impact highlight, which spans the entire timeline, but you also see that individual highlight shown on that relevant time series. The main ones you'll see are the low page content, you'll see a low frame rate issue card, and you'll see a high battery drain issue card. Quickly, we'll review the zooming and zoom tools. So if you go to this toolbar, you can see there's a few different zoom tools available. You can zoom in by clicking this zoom in button that will zoom in the center of the view, and you can do that multiple times. Zoom out will similarly zoom out from the center of the view, and then fit will fit to the entire session timeline. One note is that when you zoom in, you can actually, if you have a convenient method to do so, you can scroll horizontally on the timeline. This is easiest on a MacBook, for example. And then the other thing to mention here is that probably the most useful zoom tool is to hold Shift and drag. And when you do so, you can zoom in on a very specific region of interest. So again, you hold Shift, you click, and you drag, and you can zoom in on a specific region. So we'll just do that one more time, just to show you. Perfect. Just below the time series, we'll jump into the call stack view. So here we have, in this session, we have the time series. You can see down here, we have the function called timeline. This is actually derived from the method profiling that was implemented in Nimble and now has been ported to the HeadSpin product. With this, you can see it's marked as a beta feature. There's still some additional work that we need to do in order to connect this timeline call stack to the issue cards that we've also ported from Nimble to HeadSpin. The hung real method is one example of those issue cards. With this function called timeline, you can hide it using this arrow, expand it, and on hover, you get the details for each of these, each event on this timeline. When you click on any individual event, you can expand its children. And you can always zoom in here, just like you can with the timeline in general, to see more details. The intention here is to connect, for example, the hung real method issues, these issue cards from, again, from the Nimble product to highlighting individual methods on this timeline. You can see if I click on this issue card that isn't implemented yet. So this is a project probably coming in Q2. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the existing features for the code profile call stack. What I'll do now is I'll start diving into events on the timeline, specifically for session labels. So session labels are this tool that we created to provide basically additional context or create events on this timeline. And those can be totally custom events, or they can be events with some semantic meaning. So what you'll see is that as a part of a capture session, we'll automatically parse and some events and create those as session labels on the timeline. Session labels in this example include the foreground activity, the foreground application, the log warnings, and the log exceptions. And then I have this, this test category, test label here that I've created manually. So as you're navigating through this application, you can see here I'm on the home screen. And then as soon as I launch the browser, you can see that we now have an event that tracks how long that browser is open during this session. And since it's the browser, there's just one main activity. But if there were multiple activities, for example, corresponding to different screens or different parts of an application, you would see those annotated on this timeline as well. If I was running an automation session, for example, an Appium session or a Selenium session, then you would also see those Appium or Selenium commands annotated on this timeline as well. So you can see exactly where you are in terms of your automation session, as well as which commands were issued and what the response was, whether they succeeded or not, and all that is captured on this timeline. If you click on any event on this timeline, such as here, you get this details card. If I hover over the details card, you can see that it highlights in yellow the appropriate event. You can see different details such as start, the end, the duration, and then this unique ID, which is called the label ID. And this is the unique ID you can use to query for this particular event, either using our APIs or using the business intelligence database. So some of these events, for example, the log exceptions, if there was a log exception that was associated with the current foreground application, then we would automatically highlight that and create an issue card that corresponds to that. And when you click on that issue card, it would highlight the relevant log exceptions. So in this case, there aren't any that are directly correlated with this application, but you can click on any of these exceptions. You can see the stack trace and dig into the data there. One quick note on the data here, you can hide or expand using this arrow again. With session labels, you can pin these labels to the session. So once you pin a label, you'll see this hide one pinned item. You can click that to hide or show the pinned items. And pinning means that when anyone opens this session, these detail cards will be opened by default. So if there's something you want to share with other people, or you really want to make a focus for the session, you can pin those cards and those can always be shared. One other thing I'll mention is that even if you don't share them, you'll note that there's also some query parameters up here that are added to the URL whenever I click on a new session label and open up a new details card. So even if you don't pin a particular label, you can still deep link to having these labels highlighted just by copying and pasting this URL. The last thing I'll mention here is that you can just click and drag on the timeline. When you do so, you get this create label interface that pops up. You can choose whether to pin that label to the session or not. You can choose the type of label to create. There's the default user label, which has no semantic meaning to the analysis engine. But you can also create a number of analysis labels. And these have different side effects. We'll have a separate session on what we call our on-demand analytics. And we'll follow up on that in the future date. The page load requests and audio match and video content labels, I think are probably our three most used on-demand analytics features. And those enable you to ask questions of your data, such as how long did it take for a page to visually load? Where did this audio clip occur within the session? And what is the subjective video quality of a particular video playback region? In this case, I'll just stick with the user label. You can give an optional category if you want. If you don't, that's fine. And then you just need to fill in the name. You can choose the start time and end time. Here it automatically populates what you selected, but of course you can edit this manually, or you can make it instantaneous if you want just an individual dot to show up on that timeline. And you can add some optional data that can be just plain text. It can be markdown or it can be valid JSON. And the details card will structure that text in a way that is appropriate to the content. So in this case, I'll just go ahead and create that label. You can see I didn't apply a category, so there's no category name. And it's just an instantaneous label, so it's a little dot here with the duration of 0. Okay. So I think that, the last thing I wanted to cover is that on this toolbar here, if I go ahead and collapse this session or this time series, you'll see that we have a couple of buttons called group by host and group by category. Group by category in particular applies to the session labels, and that means that it's just going to group these labels by these sort of titles, each of these categories. So if I uncheck this, then basically it just collapses all the labels on this, within the timeline. So that's a quick rundown of the session labels. Next, we'll dig into the network traffic and the network traffic timeline. So if I go in here now and scroll down, you'll see that starting with CNN.com, which is the webpage that I launched, we have the network traffic that we've captured through our man-in-the-middle proxy. So what we're doing is we're routing network traffic from the device through the hosts, through a man-in-the-middle setup, which is used to capture and decrypt the network traffic. We record the network traffic on the host, and then we route it back through the device and out the device's natural interface. So, through the network card or the SIM or Wi-Fi. So in terms of network traffic that we capture DNS, we capture the TCP, TLS, and HTTP traffic. We capture WebSocket, which is built on top of the HTTP. And we also capture all sort of UDP traffic, although we don't visualize UDP packets on the timeline directly. But those will be found in your PCAP file, which is the binary network traffic. So here we have the DNS lookup for CNN.com. What you'll see in any sort of natural flow is that you have to look up the IP address for the host name, and then you can open a connection to that host and you can make several requests. Here we have captured the DNS question as well as the answers. These are the different potential servers that the client can talk to. And we have all the information about this DNS lookup. You can see that if we look at, for example, this CNN.com section down here, we can click on the titles. We can, for example, highlight all CNN.com traffic just by clicking on the CNN.com part. We can highlight, so that's all of the domain traffic. We can highlight traffic to a specific subdomain. So for example, www.cnn.com. You can see the DNS lookup. You can see connections on different ports, port 80 and port 443. And then in this section, we have our standard TCP, TLS, and HTTP traffic. In this case, this is an HTTP2 connection. So what we're going to do is we can click on this white bar, which is an individual TCP connection. This opens up a details card where you can go and you can highlight this. One thing I'll note is that As I am clicking on these things, you can see that the URL is also going to update in a similar way to what we did with the session labels. So if you wanted to share, for example, this specific request, you can click on that request, you can open up that details card, and you can copy this deep link into this view with these details highlighted. The color scheme here is exactly the same color scheme as what you'll find in these pie charts. So, you know, there's a direct relationship between these charts up here and the traffic shown on this network timeline. What I'll do here is click on this TCP connection, which is this big white bar. You can see the TCP connection to CNN.com. You can see the IP address as well as the port, when it happened, how long it was open, how long the TCP handshake took, how long the TLS connection took to establish, and then you can see all the individual requests and their status codes on this timeline. With any of these, you can also click on those to dig deeper. And here, what I've done is I clicked on a specific request. You'll note that it's this request here that is being highlighted from this details card. If I want to copy the URL that the request was made to, I can click on this copy to clipboard. I have also the full information about this in the title here, as well as a breakdown of the request, the response, the request headers, and the response headers. So you can see this is a fairly detailed description of this request. If you see individual dots, for example, very similar in rendering to these dots here, within one of these white bars, that's actually a WebSocket, and those are WebSocket messages that are being sent back and forth. So, just quickly sort of navigating through this, you can see here, we have these purple bars here. These are really slow TLS handshakes. You can click on these, you can see how long it took. And this is, again, going to be corresponding to our slow TLS issue card, which we highlight over here. And when you click on that, these will be highlighted automatically. When you're done looking at details, you can always click clear, and that'll clear all of the details. If you want to close the highlighting, you can click close here or up or over here. So there's a couple more things I wanted to mention here. In the background, you see these orange highlights. These highlights are corresponding to some user experience issue. Typically, this is going to be low page content or a loading animation. In this case, you can see that there's a page that's loading, it's a blank screen, and there's this loading bar. So those are those orange highlights that span the timeline. If you click on the corresponding issue card, those will be brought to the forefront. And that just provides context around the user experience issues that are happening when you're looking at the network traffic. The other thing I'll mention is that similar to the session labels, where you can group by category or collapse that, you can do the same thing with the network traffic. You can group it by host, which is how it's shown currently, or you can collapse it. And you can see now we're just looking at kind of a raw view of all the network traffic and when it's happening. So, typically I don't expect that you would need to use that group by host. Okay, that's a quick rundown of the network traffic timeline. Next, we'll dive into the issue cards. We've already talked about issue cards, to some degree in the previous session, but issue cards are a value add that HeadSpin provides, where we analyze not only the capture data, not only for metrics, but also for known user experience issues or performance issues or performance anti-patterns. And so issue cards are shown in this left-hand panel. They're prioritized in terms of metric, which we call impact time, from the highest priority to the lowest priority down at the bottom. And we have this notion of union impact time, which is shown here at the top. This is kind of a top level metric for this session. So let's briefly talk about issue cards and impact time. So issues always include some benchmark for performance or some benchmark for expectations. Maybe the easiest example to think about is, for example, the low page content where you have a blank screen. In this case, you can see that this blank screen is persisting for a really long time. But we don't expect customers to load content instantly. Ultimately, they have to fetch this content over the network, and that takes some time. So we have a benchmark of expected performance of 1 second for classifying these issues. That means if the load time takes longer than 1 second, we'll go ahead and surface these issue cards. And that 1 second is based off of studies that have been done by Google and others that indicate that after 1 second, the user mentally disengages from the task at hand, and you begin losing your user, and that translates directly into revenue that the application can get. So in terms of impact time is kind of our common metric that we use across all these issues to put them, basically to project them on the session timeline. So impact time is always going to be some portion of the session time. For example, if we hover over these orange regions, you see the impact tooltip here that shows how long this loading page load took to complete. So you can see, basically we spent just over 2 seconds loading this page, and that that's how long the user experience was affected by this particular issue. So each of these issues is going to have some impact time on this timeline. Domain sharding is going, and that's going to be calculated somewhat specifically to the issue, but it's always going to be how much additional time, right, was added to this session because of this particular issue. So the union impact time here is basically if you take all the impact time from all the issues, which can overlap on the timeline, and merge those together, this would be something that looks pretty similar to something like the impact count. So impact count and impact time are two issue-related time series. Impact count is going to show you the number of active issues at any given time during this session. So you can see we have a peak here of 25 impacts that were active all at once. So if you just look at any time during the session, basically the union impact time is how much of the session is affected by issues. And that's the summary of it. So this is bounded by 0, which is, none of the session is affected by issues. You have a perfect session, good for you. And the session duration is the maximum value. So the session duration here is 1 minute and let's say 18 seconds. So the maximum value of this union impact time would be 1 minute and 18 seconds. With each issue card, you can see that there's sort of a standard pattern here. They're prioritized by impact time. You can see the number of issues. You can see kind of a quick visualization of how much each individual issue contributes. So for example, in slow TLS, you can see that there's one particular host that has much slower TLS handshakes than all of the rest that are identified as issues. When you look at an issue card, it will have a summary of what the issue is and hopefully how it's calculated. So in this case, if your application took longer than 300 milliseconds to complete that TLS handshake, we'll go ahead and create this issue. And then we have a breakdown of what can you do to understand this issue and potentially debug it. With each issue card, there's this view table where you can click the view table and you can see a breakdown of this issue. This table is sortable, so you can sort by any of these individual columns. You can see, for example, you know, this particular host that we identified had a very long TLS handshake, and specifically for this URL. These tables can be downloaded as CSV files, by clicking here, or by clicking on this download CSV button, or you can of course use our REST APIs to download these as well. Oh, and the other thing I'll mention here is that just like with other parts of this UI, there's this little orange question mark that you can always click on, and this will show you information about the issues. Okay. So I have a breakdown of the anatomy of issue cards here in the slide deck. Please feel free to review that, but it basically covers what I just described. So that's a quick rundown of the Waterfall UI. I know we are rapidly running toward the end of the session, so I'll jump into the Burst UI, and we'll sort of navigate through that and compare. So you can access the Burst UI, for example, by clicking on the Burst UI tab here, or you can go into the session list and you can click on this Burst UI button if it's enabled. Let's see. Here. For some reason, this is not really loading, but let me try this session. Okay, great. Okay, so you'll note that the Burst UI has some of the same features. For example, there is the title pane. You can swap between the Waterfall UI and Burst UI. You can see that custom title and description, although in this case you can't edit it. You can you have the same options to add to a user flow, the same interface to do so, the same options for creating tags or editing tags or deleting tags, and kind of a big map view of the location where it was captured, in this case, Mountain View. Down here, you have the video element, so you can see the screen recording. As you scroll through this timeline over here on the right-hand side, you can see how the screen recording changes. You have the same options in terms of reset, you have play, and you can always pause. In the Burst UI, you can't actually pop this out as you would in the Waterfall UI. So you have this one particular view. The goal of the Burst UI, you can think of the Burst UI really as an issue UI. In fact, probably we'll rebrand this as an issue UI here in the coming quarters. And you can see that there's this title here of performance issues. And this chart here, you can see when I hover over this, this big purple bar here, I get an impact time. And that's basically what we're doing is we're grouping together issues that are occurring in a similar time frame. In this case, there's a lot of issues constantly occurring over much of the session. And so we see kind of one big purple bar here. But this chart basically shows if there were multiple sections of this session that had significant issues. For example, in this case, there's this small bar over here. You can see basically visually at a very high level where in the session you had the most issues, and you can click on this to do, basically deep dive into those issues. So I'll just close this here. We'll go back to this purple bar. But when I click on this, what I'm doing is I'm zooming in on that part of the session. Now my timeline corresponds to just that region of the session. You can see all the issue cards that are associated with that region of the session. So here you can see a rank prioritized list of issue types and how much impact time was attributed to each of those issues. You can also see all of the individual issue cards and how those correspond to this timeline. So you can, for example, in this case, there's a high battery drain issue that persisted for the duration of this, this impact region. And when I highlight that, you see that we have this curve that is highlighted with basically how much this particular issue contributed to the impact time in this interval. So also with each of these issue cards, you have this little inspector where you can click on this inspector to deep dive into this issue. You can see what the issue is. Again, how do I fix it? This is the same details you would see in the Waterfall UI issue card description. You get that same highlighting here in terms of the session impact curve, which in the Waterfall UI is that impact time curve, the first time series that you see in the Waterfall UI. Then you get this sort of inspector view where you can look at what's happening on the screen within this time interval. If you want to go back, you can click on this red X. That closes that current view. Then you go back to this issue view. So another thing you can do is as you are looking at these issues, you can hover over each of these. You can see what issue it's associated with and how much it contributes to the impact time in this particular interval. So here we have our slow TLS issue, and you can click on that issue in order to jump into the highlight for that specific issue. So in this case, we have slow TLS. We have that same host that we identified as being particularly slow. And we open up this network activity view where, again, the colors of TCP, TLS, the wait time and download time, all of these colors are the same as what you would see in the Waterfall UI. Here you can see the impacted hosts are highlighted at the top of this. So when you are looking at this host, this is the first host that will be shown in this network activity view. You can click on any of these events to see what, for example, what the request was and what the timings were. And then you can also click on the inspector to dive even deeper and open up the message inspector. So this is similar to the details card that you'd see in the Waterfall UI. You have the content type, status code, when it happened, the request URL, the timings, the request headers, and the response headers. And then down below you have the other hosts. So this just provides context into what else was happening during this time. So I think that covers the Burst UI. We've shown the network details. We've shown the message inspector. We've shown the screen recording issue details. So the last thing I want to show is that in both Burst UI and the Waterfall UI, at the bottom, you have this Compare Sessions tab. When you click on this, you can use this to compare two sessions directly to each other. In this case, I have one session that's already been populated, and then I can also add the current session to compare. When I do so, then I can go ahead and launch this Compare Session view, and that will open up a new view where I will see the two different sessions, the device info, the screen recordings, and their timelines. And I can scroll through their timelines. We'll also see that the issue impacts, those orange highlights will load. And then we'll have a breakdown of differences in terms of the issues and the network traffic. So I won't spend too much time there. We can cover those comparisons in more detail. And I think I am at this point out of time. So if there are any quick questions, I'll go ahead and take those now.